You useless old cargo. Sign the papers and disappear from my life.
You useless old cargo. Sign the papers and disappear from my life. He humiliated her in front of his young mistress, filmed her tears for Instagram, and celebrated as she signed away everything, or so he thought. What this arrogant Lagos businessman discovered next destroyed him completely. Welcome, everyone. This is our story. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In the heart of Lekki, Lagos, where wealth whispers through glass towers and designer boutiques line streets paved with ambition, a woman sat invisible in her own humiliation. Adanna clutched a pen with trembling fingers, her worn wrapper and faded headscarf drawing sneers from the secretary who muttered just loud enough. Some women don't know when to let go of what was never theirs. Across the mahogany table in Barrister Okonkwo's luxury office, her husband of 23 years lounged in Italian leather like a king granting final judgment. Chibuzo, the man she'd built from nothing, scrolled through his phone with bored arrogance while his new fiancée, a 28-year-old influencer dripping in gold, perched on his lap like a purchased trophy. They were planning their future. Penthouse parties, Maldives vacations, Range Rover convoys, all funded by what he called his empire. All celebrated on her grave. 23 years ago, before the glass towers and designer labels, before the Range Rovers and penthouse views, there was only Mushin Market and impossible dreams. Adanna stood behind her small vegetable stall, the wooden plank balanced precariously on cinder blocks, her hands stained green from sorting bitter leaf under the merciless Lagos sun. Her mother had died 6 months earlier, leaving her nothing but the stall, a small plot of land in their village, and a piece of advice whispered on her deathbed that Adanna didn't yet understand. Own the farm, daughter. Not just the harvest. The market pulsed with its usual chaos. Hawkers shouting, generators coughing black smoke, the thick smell of overripe plantains mixing with exhaust fumes and human sweat. That's when she first saw him. Chibuzo emerged from the crowd like ambition given human form, tall and handsome despite the holes in his shoes, his shirt collar frayed but clean, his eyes burning with a kind of hunger that couldn't be satisfied with food alone. He stopped at her stall not to buy vegetables, but to escape the sun, and within minutes he was telling her about his vision, an importation business that would transform him from Mushin hustler to Victoria Island mogul. I just need capital, he said, his voice thick with frustration and dreams deferred. 50,000 naira to register the business, buy my first container of goods. But nobody believes in me. My own family calls me a dreamer. Adanna listened, studying his face, seeing something her mother might have recognized. Not love, not yet, but potential wrapped in desperation. Against every practical instinct, against her auntie's warnings that men forget the women who lift them up, she made a decision that would architect the next 2 decades of her life. I have land, she said quietly, in my village. My mother's inheritance. I could sell it. Chibuzo's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. Why would you do that?
You don't even know me.
Because, Adanna said, her mother's voice echoing in memory, I believe in investing in things that grow. 3 weeks later, she handed him 120,000 naira, everything her mother's land had brought, everything she owned in this world. The village elders called her foolish. Her aunties warned that she'd thrown away her future for a smooth-talking stranger. But as Chibuzo counted the money with shaking hands, overwhelmed with gratitude, Adanna made one quiet request that seemed inconsequential at the time. Let me handle the paperwork, she said. The business registration, the legal documents. You focus on the importing, the networking, the vision. I'll manage the boring administrative work. Chibuzo agreed immediately, relieved to delegate what he considered tedious details. He never thought to question why an illiterate market woman with only primary school education wanted to manage legal documents. He never wondered what she might be protecting, what she might be building in the shadows of his ambition. He simply took her money, kissed her forehead with genuine gratitude, and began constructing what he believed would be his empire. Adanna watched him go, her mother's words settling into her bones like prophecy. Own the farm, daughter. Own the seeds. Own the harvest. She was already planning her first visit to a lawyer. A young woman named Okonkwo, her distant cousin, who was studying law at night school and who understood that sometimes the greatest power lies not in visibility, but in the careful architecture of legal foundations that no one thinks to examine until it's far too late. 6 months pregnant, Adanna stood over a smoking charcoal stove at 4:30 in the morning, her swollen ankles throbbing as she fried akara for the early morning crowd. The bean cakes sizzled in hot oil while Chibuzo slept soundly in their one-room apartment in Mushin, exhausted from another late night, networking at beer parlors with potential business contacts.
She didn't complain.
This was the season of planting, her mother would have said, and planting required sacrifice invisible to those who only wanted to enjoy the harvest. The business registration fees were due, 15,000 naira. And Chibuzo's first importation deal had consumed all the capital she'd given him. So Adanna hawked akara, saved every naira, and smiled through the exhaustion that made her vision blur and her back scream with pregnancy weight. But she wasn't just selling bean cakes. She was building something far more valuable than Chibuzo's growing network of contacts, something that would outlast his charm and ambition. On a humid Tuesday afternoon, while Chibuzo met with shipping agents at the port, Adanna took a Danfo bus to a cramped law office in Yaba, where her cousin Okonkwo worked as a junior associate while attending night school. The young woman looked up from her books, concern crossing her face at Adanna's swollen belly and tired eyes. "Cousin, you should be resting," Okonkwo said, offering her chair. "I didn't come here to rest," Adanna replied, lowering herself carefully. "I came to protect what I'm building. Not from him. For us. For this baby." She explained everything. The land she'd sold, the capital she'd provided, the business Chibuzo was constructing with her inheritance as foundation. Okonkwo listened, her legal mind already assembling strategies, already seeing what Adanna's mother had seen, the necessity of owning roots, not just fruits. Together, they created Okafor Holdings Limited, a family trust structured with elegant simplicity. Adanna as primary beneficiary, Chibuzo as operational manager. Every asset purchased with her seed capital would be registered under this trust, protected, documented, legally hers while appearing to be theirs. "He'll need to sign incorporation papers," Okonkwo warned. "Will he read them?" Adanna smiled, tired but certain. "He never reads paperwork. He says it's boring. He trusts me to handle administrative details while he handles the important work." The words dripped with irony neither woman acknowledged aloud. Over the following months, as Chibuzo's business began generating profit, as he purchased inventory and rented warehouse space, as his name started appearing on shipping manifests and business permits, every document flowed through Adanna's quiet hands to Okonkwo's careful filing. Chibuzo signed everything she placed before him, distracted by bigger visions, grateful his wife handled tedious legal requirements. His mother visited often, her contempt sharp as broken glass. "Useless woman, can't even give my son a comfortable home. Look at you, selling akara like a common roadside girl. My son deserves better." Chibuzo never defended her, simply shrugged as if his mother's insults were weather, unpleasant but inevitable. Adanna absorbed every cruel word, made herself smaller, more invisible, more forgettable. While his mother complained and Chibuzo networked, she signed documents in triplicate, filed corporate papers, built legal infrastructure as carefully as a mason laying foundation stones that would support towers not yet imagined. She owned the farm. She owned the seeds. Soon, she would own every harvest her husband believed he'd grown with his own hands alone. 10 years into the marriage, Chibuzo's face appeared in this day newspaper's business section under the headline, "Self-Made Mogul." The Chibuzo Success Story. Adanna read it while sitting in their new Lekki apartment, her coffee growing cold as she studied the article that erased her completely. He spoke eloquently about vision and perseverance, about taking risks when others doubted, about building an empire from nothing through sheer determination and strategic thinking. Her name appeared once, Buried in the final paragraph, Chibuzo credits his supportive wife for managing the home while he focused on business. As if managing the home was all she'd done. As if her inheritance hadn't been the seed. As if her Acra sales hadn't funded the registration. As if her legal architecture wasn't the foundation holding up everything he claimed to have built alone. The business had exploded beyond even Chibuzo's ambitious projections. Import deals multiplied, electronics, textiles, automobile parts flowing through Lagos ports with his company's name stamped on every manifest. He moved them from Mushin to Lekki, then purchased the Banana Island penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. Range Rovers appeared in their driveway like metallic evidence of success. His clothes came from London now, his watches from Switzerland, his confidence from the intoxication of self-mythologizing. At business dinners, Adanna sat quietly in traditional attire. She deliberately chose to appear modest, almost frumpy, the village wife who hadn't evolved with her husband's ascension. She spoke little, smiled appropriately, and listened to Chibuzo tell their story with her role reduced to background decoration. Other wives wore designer labels and discussed their own careers. Adanna wore simple ankara and discussed nothing, making herself forgettable, unremarkable, invisible by design. But 3 evenings each week, after Chibuzo fell asleep scrolling through business proposals, Adanna took a taxi to the same night school where her cousin Okonkwo now taught corporate law as an adjunct professor. She sat in the back row, notebook open, absorbing information about trusts and holding companies, about asset protection and corporate structures, about the legal frameworks that separated true ownership from the illusion of possession. She learned that power doesn't require visibility, that the person whose name appears on the building rarely owns the foundation, that every empire rises on infrastructure the powerful take for granted until it's removed. When Chibuzo suggested transferring properties into his name alone for simplicity to streamline operations, Adanna deflected with practiced ease. "The tax benefits are better this way," she said, reviewing paperwork at their dining table. "The trust structure protects us from liability. It's more efficient. Trust me." He did, because he didn't actually understand the legal complexities he signed. His arrogance had made him intellectually lazy. Success had convinced him his instincts were sufficient, that details were beneath him, that his wife's administrative work was necessary but unimportant, like housekeeping or grocery shopping. So he signed every document she placed before him, registered every new acquisition through Okafor Holdings Limited, built his empire on legal architecture he never thought to examine. Each signature reinforced Adanna's invisible fortress. Each property deed bore her trust's name in print, so small even lawyers sometimes missed it. Each asset flowed through structures she controlled while Chibuzo collected accolades, gave interviews, and believed completely in the mythology of his self-made success, never suspecting that the empire he was building belonged, legally and completely, to the forgettable woman in the simple wrapper who sat silently in the background of every photograph. 15 years into the marriage, Chibuzo came home smelling of perfume that wasn't Adanna's. Something expensive and floral that clung to his collar like evidence he didn't bother to hide. She said nothing, simply took his jacket to hang in the closet, her fingers brushing against the fabric stained with foundation makeup 2 shades lighter than her skin. When she asked if he wanted dinner, he waved her away, already on his phone, laughing at messages that made his eyes light up in ways she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "I ate already," he said, not looking up. "At a business dinner." The lipstick on his shirt collar suggested the dinner had been very personal indeed. Adanna learned quickly that confrontation only invited gaslighting. The one time she mentioned the perfume, Chibuzo's face had twisted with irritation. "You're paranoid. Insecure. Do you know how unattractive jealousy is on a woman your age? I work with female colleagues. Should I ask them to stop wearing perfume because my wife is threatened?" She never mentioned it again. Instead, she watched. Late nights became overnights. Business trips extended mysteriously. Phone calls were taken in other rooms, his voice dropping to intimate whispers that carried through walls. His mother visited more frequently now, her contempt sharpened by her son's obvious dissatisfaction. She sat in Adanna's living room, drinking Adanna's tea, and discussed other women, younger women, educated women, modern women, who would have been better matches for her successful son. That Bemisola from the yacht club, she has 2 master's degrees. Or the Adanna girl, her father owns hotels. These are women who could match my son's status, not some village girl who got lucky. Chibuzo never corrected his mother, simply nodded as if considering the merit of these observations. At a business anniversary dinner at the Eco Hotel, Chibuzo introduced Adanna to his associates with words that cut deeper than any affair could. "This is just my wife." Just. As if she were furniture. Interchangeable. Unremarkable. Meanwhile, he lavished praise on his new business development manager, a 29-year-old woman named Kemi with a sharp suit and sharper ambition, who touched his arm possessively while discussing market expansion strategies. The woman smirked at Adanna, a look that communicated everything. "I'm what he wants now. You're what he's stuck with." Adanna excused herself to the bathroom, but not to cry. She'd stopped crying years ago. Instead, she pulled out her phone and texted her cousin. "I think it's time to prepare." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then Okonkwo's response. "Come to my office tomorrow. Let's build your exit strategy." For the next 3 years, while Chibuzo grew bolder in his disrespect, staying out entire weekends, bringing girlfriends to family functions, openly discussing divorce at dinner parties as if Adanna weren't sitting beside him, she quietly documented everything. Bank statements, property records, corporate filings. She reinforced the legal fortress she'd spent 2 decades constructing, adding new layers of protection, ensuring every asset was accounted for, every loophole closed, every signature verified. Okonkwo helped her establish separate accounts, create paper trails, build an undeniable case for what Adanna had always known but could now prove beyond legal doubt. That the empire Chibuzo believed he'd built belonged entirely to the invisible woman he'd spent 15 years taking for granted and 3 years actively discarding. 23 years into the marriage, Chibuzo brought home a replacement before bothering to discard the original. Her name was Zainab. 28 years old with 500,000 Instagram followers, a wardrobe full of designer labels paid for by men who mistook transactions for relationships, and zero interest in building anything that couldn't be photographed for social media validation. She was everything Adanna wasn't. Young, modern, socially visible, fluent in the language of filters and hashtags and carefully curated illusions. Chibuzo was intoxicated. He stopped hiding the affair entirely, bringing Zainab to the Banana Island penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon while Adanna prepared lunch in the kitchen. "This is Zainab," he announced, not bothering with explanations or apologies. "She'll be joining us for dinner occasionally. I expect you to be welcoming." Zainab didn't acknowledge Adanna beyond a dismissive glance that categorized and discarded her in seconds. Old, unfashionable, irrelevant. She walked through the penthouse Adanna had furnished, trailing manicured fingers across surfaces Adanna had selected, already mentally redecorating, already claiming territory. Within weeks, Zainab's presence became constant. She posed for Instagram photos on the balcony overlooking the Atlantic, the Banana Island location tag prominently displayed. She draped herself across the Italian leather furniture Adanna had chosen, wearing jewelry Chibuzo had originally purchased for anniversaries that no longer mattered. Her captions celebrated her blessed life and manifestation journey, as if manifesting meant sleeping with married men for access to their assets. The comments section overflowed with congratulations and envy. Chibuzo introduced her to business associates as "my future," not even bothering to lower his voice when Adanna stood 10 feet away. At a restaurant opening in Victoria Island, he draped his arm around Zainab's waist while photographers captured the moment. The blogs posted the images within hours. Business mogul Chibuzo steps out with new love. The articles framed it as upgrade, evolution, a successful man finally finding a partner who matched his elevated status. No one asked about the first wife. No one wondered about the woman who'd been erased from his mythology as completely as her contributions had been erased from his success story. Adanna became a ghost in her own home, walking through rooms where Zainab now lounged, cooking meals Zainab critiqued, existing in spaces that no longer acknowledged her presence. Chibuzo's cruelty escalated from neglect to active destruction. "You're illiterate," he said one morning at breakfast while Zainab filmed him on her phone for a day-in-the-life video. "Useless. A burden I've carried for 23 years out of pity. Look at you, you can't even dress properly. You embarrass me in front of important people." Zainab laughed, the sound high and cruel, already editing the footage to post later with some caption about leaving dead weight behind and choosing yourself. She posted photos in Adanna's bedroom, wearing Adanna's silk robe, the caption reading, "Upgrade complete nail polish sparkles, sometimes you have to trade in the old model." The comments celebrated her victory. Strangers who knew nothing about 23 years of sacrifice congratulated Chibuzo for finally finding happiness and praised Zainab for knowing her worth. Through it all, Adanna played her role perfectly, diminished, defeated, powerless. She nodded when Chibuzo announced divorce plans. She remained silent when he explained, with elaborate patience, as if speaking to a child, that she should be grateful for whatever settlement he chose to offer. "You contributed nothing," he said, Zainab recording every word. "I built this empire with my own sweat and vision. I'm being generous, even discussing terms with you." Adanna's hands trembled as she nodded agreement, while in her purse, her phone displayed a text from Barrister Okonkwo. "Everything is ready. Let him think he's won. The truth will destroy him completely." The divorce lawyer's office in Victoria Island occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower where wealth whispered through marble corridors and original artwork hung on walls that had witnessed 1,000 endings. Adanna arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in her worn wrapper and faded headscarf, carrying nothing but a small handbag that had seen better decades. The receptionist looked up from her computer, her eyes sliding over Adanna with practiced dismissal before returning to her screen without offering greeting or acknowledgement. When Chibuzo arrived 10 minutes later, the same receptionist practically levitated from her chair, her smile suddenly radiant. "Mr. Okafor, what an honor. Barrister Okonkwo is expecting you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? We have imported sparkling if you prefer." Zainab entered behind him like she was walking a Fashion Week runway, her designer heels clicking against marble, her Birkin bag swinging from the crook of her arm, her phone already raised to capture content. She filmed everything, the expensive artwork, the panoramic Lagos views, Chibuzo's confident stride, narrating in whispered voiceover. Finally closing this chapter. New beginnings. Choosing happiness. She angled the camera to catch Adanna sitting small and defeated in the corner, adding with performative sympathy, "Some people just don't know when to let go of what was never theirs." Inside Barrister Okonkwo's office, Chibuzo sprawled across Italian leather like a king granting final judgment, his legs spread wide in posture that claimed space and dominance. Zainab perched on his lap, scrolling through photos on his phone. Images of the penthouse she planned to redecorate, the Range Rovers she'd already chosen custom colors for, the Maldives resort where they'd celebrate once this unfortunate business concluded. "Can we make this quick?" Chibuzo said, barely glancing at Adanna. "I have a meeting with investors in 2 hours, and we have dinner reservations at Noir." Barrister Okonkwo, stern-faced behind rimless glasses, slid divorce papers across the mahogany table. Her expression remained unreadable, professional, revealing nothing of the relationship that tied her to the trembling woman in the worn wrapper. Adanna's hands shook as she reached for the pen, not from fear but from the weight of this moment, the ending she'd architected, the justice she'd constructed over 23 years of invisible labor and strategic patience. Her eyes scanned words that legally dissolved a marriage that had emotionally ended years ago. Chibuzo didn't even pretend to watch. He was showing Zainab yacht rentals on his tablet, both of them laughing, planning their future funded by assets he believed were his to spend. "Sign it, you illiterate village woman." Chibuzzo spat suddenly, irritated by her hesitation. You contributed nothing. I built this empire with my own sweat, and now you want to drag me down because you're too old and useless to keep a man interested. Sign the paper and disappear from my life. Zainab giggled, adjusting her angle to capture Adanna's tears for her Instagram story. She added a caption in real time, her thumbs flying. When you finally take out the trash, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag upgrade complete, hashtag boss lady. The receptionist, summoned to witness signatures, muttered just loud enough for Adanna to hear. Shame. Some women don't know their place, holding on to men who've clearly moved on. Adanna signed, her tears falling onto expensive paper, each drop a performance of defeat so convincing that even Zainab felt emboldened enough to lean forward and whisper, You should thank him for wasting 23 years on you. Most men would have left sooner. The room erupted in cruel celebration. Chibuzzo actually stood up and danced, his movements exaggerated and mocking, his laughter bouncing off glass walls. Zainab twerked beside him, filming everything, her phone capturing his joy and Adanna's humiliation for an audience of hundreds of thousands who would watch, like, and celebrate the destruction of a woman they'd never met. They popped champagne Chibuzzo had brought specifically for this occasion, toasting their future while Adanna sat diminished and weeping, playing her final role in his mythology perfectly. Then Barrister Okonkwo cleared her throat, and the temperature shifted. The champagne bottle froze halfway to Chibuzzo's lips as Barrister Okonkwo's voice cut through the celebration like a blade through silk. Mr. Chibuzzo, she said, her tone cool and precise as a surgeon making the first incision. Before you celebrate, there are some documents my client needs you to sign as well. Standard transfer protocols. She slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany table, the sound of paper against wood somehow ominous in the suddenly quiet room. Chibuzzo barely glanced at the documents, his arrogance at its absolute apex, his sense of victory making him reckless. He scribbled his signature with the same pen that had sealed what he believed was his ex-wife's defeat, boasting loudly to Zainab about the Maldives resort he'd just booked, the presidential suite with a private pool and 24-hour butler service. 5 stars aren't enough anymore, he laughed, signing page after page, without reading a single word. We're living that 6-star life now, baby. No more dead weight dragging us down. Zainab filmed his signatures, adding real-time commentary. When a king handles his business 100 points, watch how a real man moves. The receptionist giggled from her position by the door, already texting friends about the entertainment unfolding in the office. Then Barrister Okonkwo's lips curved into the faintest smile, the expression of someone who'd waited years for this precise moment, who'd architected this justice with the patience of a chess master moving pieces across decades. Congratulations, Mr. Chibuzzo, she said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. You have just signed over every single asset you believe you own back to their rightful owner, your ex-wife, Mrs. Adanna Okafor. The room didn't just go quiet. It went airless, as if all oxygen had been suddenly evacuated, leaving only vacuum and the sound of Chibuzzo's champagne flute slipping from his fingers to shatter against marble floor. Color drained from his face like water from a broken dam, his skin turning ashen, his confident posture collapsing into something that looked like a physical blow had struck his chest. What? The word came out strangled, barely audible. Zainab's phone clattered from her manicured fingers, the live stream still running, now capturing her shocked expression for 500,000 followers who were about to witness something far more entertaining than an upgrade celebration. Barrister Okonkwo continued, her voice steady and relentless, laying out facts like a prosecutor presenting evidence that would seal a conviction. You see, 23 years ago, when Adanna sold her inheritance to fund her business, she wasn't just being a supportive wife, she was being a smart investor. Every company registration, every property deed, every vehicle title was filed under a family trust she established, with herself as the primary beneficiary and you as the operating manager. The penthouse in Banana Island. She tapped a document for emphasis. registered under Okafor Holdings Limited, a company she incorporated with her late mother's land proceeds. Those Range Rovers you're so proud of? Leased under her tax identification number. Every bank account you've been operating? Managed under the trust structure where you have signature authority, but zero ownership rights. Chibuzo lunged for the documents, his hands shaking so violently he could barely turn pages, but there it was. Page after page of property records, corporate filings, bank statements, all bearing Adanna's name in neat legal print, some dating back to when he was still borrowing money for bus fare, when holes in his shoes marked him as nobody worth noticing. Even this law firm? Barrister Okonkwo added, almost conversationally. She's been paying the retainer fees for 3 years from a separate account you never knew existed, preparing for this exact moment. The receptionist's smug expression had evaporated, replaced by something close to terror as she realized she'd been mocking the actual owner of everything in this building. Chibuzo's voice cracked, the sound of a man watching his entire reality disintegrate in real time. You illiterate village woman, how? The words came out desperate, confused, as if the very foundations of his understanding had turned to sand beneath his feet. For the first time in decades, Adanna lifted her head, her spine straightening vertebra by vertebra until she sat not diminished but dignified, transformed not through sudden change, but through the unveiling of who she'd always been beneath the performance. She reached up slowly, deliberately, and untied her headscarf, revealing gray hair she'd hidden in shame for years, now wearing it like a crown earned through suffering and strategic patience. Her voice, when it came, no longer trembled but rang steady as ancient wisdom passed down through generations of women who understood that survival required intelligence, not visibility. My mother told me something before she died, Adanna said, her eyes meeting Chibuzo's for the first time in years without flinching. She said, "A woman who feeds a man teaches him to eat, but a wise woman who feeds a man owns the farm, the seeds, and the harvest." The words hung in the air like pronouncement of judgment. I couldn't read or write well when we married, Chibuzo. You're right about that. But I could count. I counted every naira I gave you. Every naira I earned selling Accra while pregnant. Every naira I invested in the business you claimed to build alone. And I made sure every single investment had my thumbprint or signature buried in fine print that your arrogance never bothered to examine. Chibuzo's knees buckled, his body collapsing back into the leather chair that suddenly felt like a throne he'd never actually occupied. Zainab stood frozen, her phone still recording, capturing her own humiliation for an audience that was already screaming in the comments, the narrative flipping in real time from upgrade celebration to spectacular downfall. While you were busy calling me useless, Adanna continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, I was attending night school 3 evenings a week for 15 years. Learning about family trusts and corporate law from Barrister Okonkwo here. She gestured toward the lawyer, whose professional mask finally cracked into something resembling familial pride. My younger cousin. The same girl you refused to help pay university fees for 15 years ago because you said, and I quote, "Educating women is a waste of money. They'll just get married and forget everything." The lawyer nodded, her smile sharp as justice. I never forgot, Cousin Chibuzo. I remembered every insult, every dismissal, every time you told Adanna she was too stupid to understand business, while she was literally building the legal infrastructure that made your entire operation possible. Zainab grabbed her Birkin bag, her face contorted with rage and humiliation, already calculating how to spin this disaster for her followers. You're broke, she shrieked at Chibuzo. You catfished me? You let me post all those photos, tell everyone I'd upgraded, and you don't own anything? She bolted for the door, her heels clicking frantically against marble, screaming something about dusty men and wasting her time and blocking you everywhere. Her phone already pulled up to delete every photo, every caption, every piece of evidence that she'd celebrated winning a man who turned out to own nothing at all. Barrister Okonkwo handed Adanna a final set of documents, her movements ceremonial, ritualistic. This is the eviction notice for Mr. Chibuzo, effective immediately. He has 72 hours to vacate your penthouse. The cars will be repossessed tomorrow morning at dawn. As for the business accounts, they've already been frozen and transferred to your personal holding company as of 9 o'clock this morning. Chibuzzo sat weeping into his hands, his Rolex, the only thing he actually owned, glinting in the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city where his name had meant something just 30 minutes ago. Adanna stood, adjusting her wrapper with quiet dignity, the worn fabric suddenly seeming less like poverty and more like deliberate camouflage she no longer needed. She gathered her small handbag, the same battered purse she'd carried for years, and walked toward the door where her ex-husband, now nothing more than a tenant in his own delusion, sat weeping into his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that would have moved her once, but now only echoed with the hollow sound of consequences finally arriving. She paused at the doorway, looking back one final time, not with cruelty, but with the calm certainty of someone who'd carried a burden for 23 years and was finally setting it down. "I didn't sign those papers to lose everything, Chibuzzo," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of silence finally broken. "I signed them to finally be free of a man who never saw my worth. You taught me something valuable, that I don't need to be seen to have power. I don't need to be praised to have value. I don't need your recognition to know what I built." She adjusted the handbag on her shoulder, a simple gesture that somehow contained multitudes. "You can keep your shame. You can keep your tears. You can keep the mythology you created about being self-made. I'm taking back my life, my dignity, and every single asset I earned through sacrifice you'll never understand, because you've never sacrificed anything for anyone but yourself." Chibuzzo looked up, his face streaked with tears and disbelief, his mouth opening as if to speak, to beg, to negotiate, but no words came, because what argument could he possibly make against documents that bore his own signature, against legal structures he'd spent 23 years ignoring, against the quiet brilliance of a woman he'd dismissed as too stupid to deceive him? Adanna stepped into the corridor where the receptionist who'd mocked her earlier now stood frozen, suddenly remembering how to show respect to the woman who apparently owned the building where she worked. The young woman rushed forward, stumbling in her haste to hold the door open, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. "Mrs. Okafor, please, I didn't know. I'm so sorry, Adanna raised one hand gently, silencing the apology. "You didn't know because I didn't want you to know. Invisibility was my strategy, not my weakness. But perhaps next time you'll remember that the person you dismiss might be the person who signs your paycheck." She walked through the glass building's lobby where other employees suddenly snapped to attention, phones already buzzing with a story spreading through Lagos at the speed of gossip and social media. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual chaos. Traffic snarling through Victoria Island, hawkers weaving between cars, generators coughing exhaust into humid air, the relentless energy of a city that never stopped hustling, never stopped surviving. Adanna stepped into the Lagos afternoon sunlight, the heat washing over her like baptism, like rebirth, like the physical sensation of chains falling away. Her phone buzzed in her handbag. Messages already flooding in from women across Lagos who somehow already knew the story, thanking her, calling her inspiration, calling her hero, asking her how she'd done it, seeking wisdom from the woman who taught an arrogant man the most expensive lesson of his life. Barrister Okonkwo emerged from the building behind her, joining her on the steps overlooking the street where Danfo buses and luxury cars competed for space in democratic chaos. "Your mother would be proud," the lawyer said quietly, standing beside her cousin who'd trusted her with secrets and strategy for 23 years. Adanna smiled, her first genuine smile in longer than she could remember, the expression transforming her face from worn to radiant. "She already is," she said, looking up at the sky where somewhere beyond glass towers and designer boutiques, beyond the pollution and noise and desperation, in the realm where ancestors watched their children navigate the world they left behind, a mother's spirit nodded in deep satisfaction, knowing her daughter had learned the lesson perfectly, had played the longest game, had won by appearing to lose until the moment came to reveal that she'd owned everything all along. True power doesn't announce itself with noise and gold chains. It moves in silence, signs in ink, and strikes when arrogance finally blinds a fool completely.